Hi there. So in this rather long video, we are going to go through the whole match move and scene reconstruction, environment reconstruction process inside of Blender for a visual effects shot. So this is going to be, like I say, quite a long video. I'm going to go start to finish through a number of different processes. I'm going to work at my pace, but I'm going to try and explain what I'm doing as we go along. I'm also going to put some chapter markers in the description box below on YouTube so that you can jump to particular sections that you need. Okay, so here we are inside of Blender, brand new default project scene. And I'm going to start by coming along the top menu bar and getting into the motion graphics, the tracking, motion tracking section. So clicking on the little plus at the top here, coming down to VFX and then into motion tracking. I'm then going to load my footage in by clicking open and then navigating to where I have my image sequence downloaded to. I'm going to ensure that I'm selecting the first frame from this sequence and clicking open clip. It then appears inside of my user interface. I'm going to come over to my tracking settings. I'm going to set my scene frames so that my duration matches that of my footage, and I'm going to click prefetch, so it's going to load in into the memory the cache of the video for good playback. However, can you see here that it hasn't quite completed that bar along the bottom, so it's run out of memory. So I'm going to come into my preferences, come to my system, come down to memory cache limit, and this will depend on what machine you are working on, but currently I have 4 gig assigned to that. I think my machine has 32 gigs, so I'm going to increase that to half of that, so assign 16 gig to Blender, and come to my little burger menu here, save those preferences. So now when I press prefetch again, it will then complete that lilac line down the bottom. And now when I press spacebar, I get clean playback for my footage. The next thing I'm going to do is to come across to my properties panel on the side for my render properties, and in color management I'm going to change my view transform from the scene referred AGX to the standard display referred color space, so everything is looking accurate there. Back over in my tracking panel, I can set a few things up before I do my track. So because we're working with 4K footage, I'm going to increase my pattern size by doubling those values. That just means when I make a tracking marker, it's going to be twice the size as it normally would be. Obviously, I can then scale and move that around afterwards. My motion model, I'm going to go for a fine, and my match I'm going to set to previous frame. When I then look in my space, I'm ensuring that my playhead is on my first frame. I can do that down the bottom of my screen by setting that jump to endpoint button. That's going to be really important. Then I can use my scroller wheel to zoom in, and then click in my middle mouse button, my scroller wheel, to track around my scene. And so here I'm looking for tracking markers that are on my floor plane. So I only want to be tracking elements on my that are fixed on my floor. So nothing on this curb or any raised surfaces, nothing on my building, nothing on my blue thing over here, certainly nothing on my actor who's walking through the scene. I want elements that are static and stable and fixed to my floor plane. And with this particular shot, I've got a load of rocks down on my floor here, and I'm going to use those as tracking markers. So to add a marker in, I can do control click. That will add a marker. if I come over to the right hand side and come to my track settings, my track panel, I can then see that pattern that I've identified here in this window. What's also quite useful is if I come to clip display and turn on search, I can then also see the search field around the outside. So with each frame, it's going to look for this pattern within this search field. So now that I've got a tracking marker down, I can press G to move that marker around. I can press S to scale that marker bigger and smaller. The larger your markers are, the longer it's going to take to process, but sometimes larger markers are better than really tiny markers. So scaling it up a little bit, finding a pattern that is going to be there throughout the duration of my shot, and then I'm going to come down to these buttons down the bottom, and this one here, I'm going to track the selected markers forward for the entire clip. That then processes through. It does it quite quickly because I've pre-fetched my data, pre-fetched my footage in, and now I should see that I've got tracking data or movement data on both my X and my Y axes. That's what this symbolizes down the bottom of my timeline for the duration of my shot. I can then check that by scrubbing my playhead backwards and forwards, and here I'm looking at my pattern marker here, my sample, and ideally we shouldn't see any changes in that or distortions in that pattern. Now with this particular piece of footage we do have a little bit of camera shake, so there is a little bit of popping and wobbling, but I think that's a pretty solid track to start with. So I'm going to do Control L to lock that in. That means now I can't click and move that marker around, so just kind of make sure that it's safe and secure. Then I'm going to jump back to my first frame again and to repeat that process. So I'm going to find another pattern within my scene. So I'm going to get these two rocks here, track on through, lock that into place, come back to the first frame, find another pattern, track that on through. So this is what's called a supervised match move, because I am supervising the process. This is not automated. This is a manual process of me guiding the computer through the workflow, which allows me to kind of just keep an eye on what's going on. Yes, it takes longer, but we have more control and more refinement, and of course more understanding of how this whole process works. So I'm going to take some time to do some markers, and ideally I want about 15 markers. I could have more, I could have slightly fewer, but to get a good solid track, and also so that I've got some options during the solving phase, I want to get as many as I can down on this floor and get quite a nice spread of markers across my shot. So this one I've made quite large, so this one's going to probably take a little bit longer to process, but still not too long. Tracking that through, so I've got 9 so far. Let's get a few more. Might get this bit of drain over at the side there. Lock that in. Maybe get this. That in. Come back. So quite fortunate with this footage that I placed a lot of markers on the road, and so this is kind of good practice for other projects. Is that when you're on set and you're filming and you're knowing that you're wanting to do some sort of tracking. So yes, you may have seen like in big productions they have like tracking markers, like black and white That one looked a little bit wobbly. I'll keep an eye on that one. There's like tracking markers that are clearly defined as tracking markers. You tend to see it more on like green screen kind of setup where you don't have anything else to track. But when you have that kind of setup, you will then have to do an additional process in post-production where you're removing those markers, so painting them out of the scene. If you can, you could do something like what we've done here, which is placing some elements inside of your shot that look like they could naturally live there. So this is just a pebbly road or a rocky road sorry, I paused there because I was thinking about ice cream. This is just a rocky road that looks natural, so we don't have to do any painting processes later on. Okay, so I now have 19 tracking markers, so that might be good for now. I might just do one more over here just to get a nice spread across my entire road. That's looking kind of nice. Okay, so now that I have those markers in place, I'm going to select them all by pressing A and then again doing Control L just to ensure that they're all locked in case I missed any as I was going through. And I'm also going to use the color coordination setup. So again, over in the tracking settings, I can add, turn on some colors, and I'm going to make these ones green. And then because I've got multiple markers selected, I need to click this other button at the side here, which is copy that selected color to all the tracks that I have selected. So now we'll see in my dope sheet that all of my markers are now green. So with those ones in place, actually I've just realized I was zoomed in a bit too much. I could do with maybe having some markers over here as well. So let's do another couple over here. Lock that in. Come back, and can I get this one as well? There's a little bit of a blur with that one, but we'll work with it. So these ones don't have that color assigned to them. So let's add the color. It's not going to be exactly the same green, but we know that green is going to be our floor. Yeah. Okie dokie. So now that I've got those markers down, I could attempt to do a solve. So that's the tracking process. Now if we jump to solve, we can click solve camera motion, and it will look at all of those markers and calculate the movement of the shot across its duration, and try and rework out, calculate, solve what that motion of the camera was doing. And after we've clicked solve camera motion, we get an error rating appear at the top here that tells us how far it thinks it's off. So with those initial trackers as they stand, I have an error rating of 1.34, and that's 1.34 pixels. So I'm only a pixel and a bit out, and in 4K footage, a pixel and a bit is not that much. So this is actually quite a good solve. However, I know that we could potentially get this a little bit lower. So I can attempt to provide a little bit more information here. So to help it out, so in my keyframe A to keyframe B, because this is a particularly short clip, I could up that to the entire duration. So it's looking at the whole of the scene to calculate the movement. That's brought it down slightly. I could refine the focal length and the optical center, and that has helped it out. That's now brought it down to just over half a pixel, 0.59. I could also come over to my tracking markers and come down to my camera and tell it a little bit more information about my camera that I'm using. So my sensor width by default is 35mm, but I know that I was using a Blackmagic pocket camera. So Blackmagic pocket camera 4K sensor width. So I can do a quick little Google to find out that the sensor width of a Blackmagic pocket camera is 18.96 millimeters rather than 35. So I can tell Blender that 18.96. And then in terms of the focal length, we were using a 17mm lens, so I can tell it that as well. Let's solve the camera motion and see what we get there. And now I've got a, it's actually gone up, my error. And now I've got a conflict happening, so I'm telling it to refine the focal length, but so it's now telling me, no, actually, I think the focal length is 6.3. So if I turn that off over there and come back and say 17mm, to say, no, this is a 17mm camera, it's now getting confused again. So it's a little bit of back and forth of refining those values to see how close you can get. If I tell it to refine the focal length and then also update it down the bottom, is that going to also now potentially stick-ish? Not really. So we'll look at that in a little bit more detail. Another thing we can do before we mess around with that some more is look at our actual tracks themselves. So in our dope sheet, we have kind of solve errors that we have for each of our tracks. And this one at the top of the list is my worst tracker with an error of 1.3. So I can select that one to get its preview up there, and then I can have a look and see what it's doing. And it's okay, I think. I can't see that other than there's some camera shake and it's a little bit further back, so the focus and the distortion might be a little bit off, but I could kind of reduce the weight of that track, of how much that's being considered into the solve. So changing that to 0.5 and see if I can refine it a little bit more. So that's helped that track out. Now I can look at my second worst track, which is this one here, which yeah, it's kind of bobbling around a bit. I don't think I need that track. So another thing we could do is just delete it with our X key. So removing that from the solve. Now I'm down to 0.41. So that's looking a lot better. I'm underneath half a pixel of error. And now I'm just going to turn that focal length off and tell it again that it's 17mm and see if that helps us out at all. We're down to 1.3, so we've gone up again. So what is the issue here? Well, we've got some other ones that are now quite larger in terms of their error weighting. So let's bring that one down to 0.5 and maybe this one down to 0.5. Solve again. Getting it down. Let's try this one. And maybe this one as well is already 0.5. We can make it 0.25. And you can only really play around with that refinement if you've got enough tracks to play with. So that's why we've kind of calculated and placed a lot into the scene so that we can, we've got this kind of wiggle room with some of these markers. So getting that down, so just by reducing the weight of some of these, each time we solve, it's coming down slightly. Maybe it could take that to 0.75. bringing it down a bit. This one, 0.5. Getting it down to 0.8. So it seems a little bit fiddly or repetitive to try and kind of reduce those values down as much as possible. But it's important to get a good track. Yeah. So everything is kind of based on this this solve error. So we're doing quite good there. We go down to 0.74. I know this footage can go even lower than that. Let me put in another couple of markers just to see if we can see that kind of bobbled at the end. Maybe the issue is that some of these rocks are a little bit too big. So they're not actually sitting on the plane, the floor plane itself. But Blender's really good for patterns. So this pattern here is enough for it to understand that as a recognizable pattern that it can track over time. So maybe I don't need to use some of the big rocks. I can get some finer details elsewhere. So this is a pattern. Does a little wiggle at the end. So we're getting that little bit of camera shake at the end that is potentially throwing it off a little bit. But I've done this process with this particular piece of footage multiple times now, and every time I get a slightly different result, and it all depends on where my markers are and how big they are and how many they have and how they are proportioned with each other. So it's worth kind of tweaking and adjusting. And so now I can see by adding those additional markers in, I change nothing else in terms of the weighting of anything. Just by adding more markers, I've now got my solve error down to 0.12. So I'm kind of happy with that. So I'm going to stop there in terms of the solve process. So because I've added more markers, I'm just going to select all of my markers again with A and do some more color coordination. Just because I don't know what the exact green is, let's just go for an orange instead. Just make them all orange and copy that across. Okay, I'm going to do some more things though here inside of the tracking, motion tracking panel that's going to help me out later on. So I've done my solve. Now I'm going to come back to my track panel over here, come to my tracking settings extra and reduce the weight of my tracks to 0. So now when I put some markers in, these are going to be marking or tracking certain parts of my scene, but they're not going to be put in the calculations of the overall solve. So what do I need to have? Well, I want to know where this window is, particularly where the corner points of this window ledge are. The reason for that being is that when we were on location, we took some measurements of where those of how long this is. So we had a distance measurement, and I'm going to need that calculation to help set up my scene. So I've got 2 markers in. So to show you another technique, on frame 1, I've added 2 markers. This time with 0 weight markers, I don't need these to last the entire duration of this shot. So instead of tracking through the entire clip, I'm just going to click this one next to it, which is track 1 frame forward. So I'm going to click it a few times, and here I'm monitoring how these markers are moving. And yes, the other thing is I'm doing multiple markers at the same time. So I've got them both selected as I'm tracking through, and I've got now 42 frames. You need at least 5 frames. I'd say go for about 20. I just got carried away and I've got 42. But these are now in in play. So I'm locking them, and then also going to remember to do some color coordination. So my windows are going to be, they're going to be green now. It's going to define where my where those window markers are. Back to frame 1, let's put some other markers in. So I want to know where my road meets my curb. So I'm going to put a marker in there and another marker at the top of my curb, so how tall my curb is. Selecting both of those, going through frame by frame to just get a few bits of information in, lock those into place, have them selected, and do some color coordination. Let's go with, I forgot what we've used already. Let's go with yellow for these. So that's my curb. I also would like to know where my building meets my road, and also where the top of my building is, where this roof comes to, and also where this corner is going to help me out. So I can select those ones, go through frame by frame, locking them in, and then again, still with those 3 selected, assign a color to them. These are going to be pink. Do I already have some pink? Nope. So we're all good. Then I'm just going to do some more zero weights of, I want to know where this bend in the road is on that side and also on this side. So again, selecting both of those, getting a few frames in, keeping my eye on them to ensure that they are sticking to those points, locking them, assigning a color to them. And then finally, I'd like to know where this blue thing is. So I'm just going to put some markers on the kind of feet corners, so where it meets the ground. Selecting those, coming through a few frames. Locking them, assigning them a color. Okay, so there may be other markers, marker points that I could do with having. For example, I might like to know where this road meets the curb this side. So let's just do one more. So there may be other markers that I want to, or points that I would find useful to know where they are later on in the process. And that's the beauty of this, is that we can come back and add more markers at a later date. But I think this will do me for now. So those markers aren't included in the solve because they have a 0 weight to them, but they're also not included in the solve because I haven't solved my camera's motion since applying them. So even though they are 0 weight, I still need to click that solve camera motion again so that they are embedded into that solve data, and my solve error shouldn't change because that has those new 0 weight markers shouldn't be affecting those calculations. Okay, so I think my solve is good. What I now need to do is kind of translate all of this information over to my 3D viewport in Blender. So I'm going to start by choosing set background, and we can see we're looking through our Blender camera in this top window here. So that set background is sending my video footage over to my camera. And then I'm going to click Setup Tracking Scene. And this is now taking all of that data and placing that into my world inside of Blender. But the orientation of my grid and my floor plane and my cube here is not aligned. It's not orientated correctly with my footage. So I need to do a few more things here in terms of orientation. So I'm going to identify a marker inside of my scene that I think is kind of the center of my world that I want to have as my origin point. So maybe this one here might be quite good. So I'm selecting that, and in orientation over here, I'm going to set as origin. You can see how my scene updates over here. Still not right though. I need to tell it where the floor is. So I'm going to select 3 markers that kind of triangulate around that marker that I've set to be the origin. I'm going to tell that those are the floor, and see how it kind of flips and orientates around onto the floor. If this is my origin, I also want to kind of define where my y-axis is coming down my road. So I'm going to choose this marker, which is kind of diagonal down from my origin, and set that as the y-axis. I don't need to set the x because the x and the y are connected to one another. For other projects, you might want to define where the x-axis is, and then the y will follow. So you only need to do one of those. But now we can see that my scene is starting to orientate in terms of my floor and my cube inside of the 3D viewport. I've also want to kind of record and set the scale of my world. So I've got these 2 markers on my window over here, and I measured that on set to be 2.03 meters. So this is measured in meters, so it's 203 centimeters. So 2.03 is the distance between those 2 markers, and I can set scale, and that will then align and scale everything in my 3D layout to match that. And then we are pretty much done in terms of the motion tracking scene for now. We've tracked and solved and then sent all of that data over to our 3D viewport. So I can now jump to my layout view, and it's a little bit underwhelming, isn't it? Where has all my information gone? So inside of this view, we can see that we have our camera and our cube and this ground plane that's been set up through that tracking process. But the main thing is, at this stage, see as I move my playhead backwards and forwards, you can see that my camera is moving. So that motion of the camera is now translated over to the camera inside of Blender. If I look through my camera with 0 on my keyboard, I can now see my scene kind of playing out in front of me. And this cube and floor plane should be tracked and moving alongside with my footage. They're not moving in reality, the world is static, but the camera is moving. So same as in the real world. When we did that track and solve setup, Blender has done a few extra things that we need to fix. So let me get up my outliner panel, because I've just realized my head is in the way. So over here, if I get my outliner, so in the outliner, we can see that we have 2 collections now, a foreground collection and a background collection. And inside the background is this ground plane that Blender has created for us. I want to move this ground plane into my foreground. So I'm just going to drag that out of that collection into here. And then this background collection, I don't need that anymore. So make sure I've moved everything out of it, and then I can X to delete that. So I just want one collection. The other thing, and so now I'm just going to hide my face momentarily. Oh, and you still can't see. So down here, or let's kind of bring it over here, if we can. We can see we've got this where it says foreground at the top here. If I drop that down, you can see we've got a foreground and a background. we come to where it says select the background and then click on the little X to delete that as well. So these are different kind of render passes that have been created, which we don't need those extra ones. Oh, that extra one. Another thing that we need to fix, let me just join those back together, is in our compositing view. So we'll spend some more time in the compositing at a later date, but we just need to remember to tidy some things up here as well, so we know that we're seeing things accurately. This is the node structure, the compositing structure that Blender has created for us, but we've got some things in here we don't need. We don't need this one down the bottom, so we're going to delete that. And this second alpha over node, we don't need that either. So X to delete that as well. And I just need to connect these strings back up. And so ultimately, in fundamental sense, what is happening here is this is saying this is the video clip that's being undistorted and scaled accordingly so that it fits our screen. And that is being combined with our scene inside of Blender, which is our foreground collection. So anything that's inside of our foreground collection is going to be combined and overlaid over the top of our video, and then we're able to see that in the composite view, and we're also able to see that in the viewer. That's what's going on there inside of the compositor. So back in our layout view, looking through our camera, we can also see it also looks a little bit grey and foggy. So if I select my camera in my outliner view, I can come to my camera properties, and in my background images folder, I can increase the opacity to 1. I also like to come to this viewport display and increase this pass part out setting, which just all this is doing is kind of hiding everything outside of the camera view, so I can just see what my camera is seeing there. Okay, we can now see our scene here inside of Blender, but if we try to play this back, we're not getting clean playback. It's kind of struggling because we're still working with 4K footage. We needed the 4K footage when we were doing our tracking, so we wanted the best, highest resolution for that, so we've got all of that data, but we don't need it here for when we're just working in the 3D view. So I'm going to create some proxies by jumping back to my motion tracking panel, coming to my footage tab, clicking this proxy timecode button here, and then I'm going to click both the 25% for the build original and build undistorted, and then I'm going to click build proxy. And then down the bottom of the screen, which you can just see down here, is that it's now going through and making some 25% resolution proxy files based on that footage. We can then see that back in the layout view, again in our camera properties in this background images. So this is saying this is the footage that's being played in the background, but there's this proxy render size option here. So none full render will be the 4K footage, but if I switch to 25, everything kind of goes a little bit janky, but that's okay because we can still see everything, and we're just trying to get that good playback happening here inside of this view. Okay, so let's start thinking about environment reconstruction. So now that we've got our footage in, it would be really useful to be able to see our markers inside of our 3D viewport. So we can do that by coming up to our overlays options at the top here and coming down to motion tracking. And there we can see our markers start to appear. We can also increase and decrease their size. We could also change what they kind of display as, but these plain axes are good for now. And this is where the color coordination comes in handy, because now without seeing my footage, so I can only see my footage through my camera. But here in this view, I can still see my world. So I know that my orange ones were my floor. These red ones were where the parts of the road kind of bends down here. These green ones were that window. This yellow one was my curb. These blue ones were the base of my blue thing. These pink ones were the parts of the building, so where the building met the path and where those top parts of the building were. So I can use these markers as a way of now reconstructing the environment. To start with, I'm going to work with my ground plane, and I'm going to use my Cartesian views at the top here. So looking from the top down on my scene, which is also number 7 on a number pad. So I'm now looking down on my scene. So here's my camera looking down my road. My building is over on the side here. And with this ground plane, if I go from object mode into edit mode, I can then select individual vertices and press G to guide and move them around inside of my scene here. And what I can do is align them to the correct markers so that I know where they are in 3D space. So because I've got this yellow marker, which is where the road met the pavement, I can move a point to there. Actually, what might be nice to see as I'm doing this is if I bring up my yeah, let's have that there. We can actually see the camera through here. So we can see what's going on as I'm building, yeah? So this is what my camera is seeing. So this vertex is this one at the front of the road. And then from the top view, on the right-hand side of my screen here, I'm aligning that to that marker on the floor. Then I could take this one down the bottom and guide it down to be where that kink in the road happens. And this one I can move down to be the other side of the road where that meets. See how they're starting to align in my camera view. And then this final one, I'm going to guide that kind of in line with this one, but I've also got that red marker there, which was where that curb is, so where the road meets the floor. So now I've aligned this, so the floor is now pretty close to where that road is. Yeah, I'm also just going to delete my cube because I don't need that. Let's come back to my top view. And so let's go back into edit mode for this plane. Guide that marker around. Sorry, guide that vertex around to meet that marker. But now I need some more road. So if I go to edge select, which is also number 2 on the top of my keyboard, I can select this edge. And if I press E to extrude, I'm now creating some more geometry. Now I don't have any markers further down my road, so that could be something I should have done, but I'm kind of eyeballing it here slightly, so not super best practice, but because I can keep an eye on what's happening in my camera here, and just assuring that that is accurate to what's going on in the camera view as well, sorry, in the 3D view, I can see that this kind of makes sense, that our road came down and then it bent a little bit as we come down the street there. Let me move this across slightly, and this across slightly, and this across slightly. So all of that is kind of looking nice. I also need some road in front as well, so I'm going to repeat the process up here. So selecting the edge and guiding it on the y-axis down my road. Then I could take this vertex and just move that across, just so it's kind of aligned straight with this one. Same with this. We're not really going to see that that much, although we might as the camera moves back. So now I've got my road reconstructed. But with this road, I can also create the pavement. So again, in edit mode, down this side, if I select these 3 edges now that make up this, where the road meets the pavement, and if I look down my y-axis by pressing number 1 on the keyboard, just take a little moment to orientate myself around. So I'm now looking down my road, my building is on my left. There's the camera, so it's like I'm stood down here looking down my road. But what I'm looking for here is these markers that were where my curve is, and I know that I've got my edges selected. So if I press E to extrude and then Z to move it up on the Z axis, I can align those, bring that line up to meet that yellow marker. Then if I look through my top, I can then extrude again and bring these out on my x-axis to be my pavement coming underneath my building. Let me just turn on wireframe here so you can see what's happening. So I've now got some curbs happening. Let me also do that over here as well so you can see it. So I've now got a floor and a curb in terms of 3D geometry. I'm now going to add a building in, so I can come to my add, so back into object mode, so ensuring that it's a separate object. I'm going to add mesh cube, so that brings a cube into my scene. I can bring that over to my building, and this I'm going to scale it on the y-axis, and I'm going to use these window markers here, these green ones, to align my building, so rotating it so that it aligns with those markers. But I know that those markers aren't where the actual building is, because that's on a little windowsill. The actual building is here, so I'm just using those green ones as a way of getting that angle right of my building. But then if I guide it and move it to align with this one, which is where my building meets the path, I can then guide that whole object up so it's kind of sat on the floor. But then I only want to make it as long as the road. So if I go into edit mode, I can now select this face. So number 3, or this marker up here, to select this face, and I can then guide that down down the road. But if I were to do G to guide and then Y to move it on my y-axis, that just pressing G and Y locks my movement to the global, so the world y-axis. So can you see as I'm bringing that down on the y-axis, my rotation is kind of shifting and skewing slightly because I had rotated it. It's not actually aligned with the world. So instead of that, if I press Y again, so GYY, I'm now on the local y-axis of that building or that object, and I can now bring that down to be roughly where I think it needs to be, which can be here-ish. Then I can do the same on this one as well to make it a little bit beyond the camera. So GYY, and just make that building section longer. So now I've got a building that goes down the entirety of my road. In terms of the height of my building, I've got a marker for that as well. So that was this marker at the back here is this one here where this top of this grate is. So looking from the side, I can guide, and have that top face selected, I could guide that up on the z-axis to align with that marker. Now this portion of my building is the right height. tabbing out back into object mode. To get this next section, I'm just going to take this object that I've already got and duplicate it with Shift D, move it up on the Z axis. Then in edit mode, again, I can come to my side view here and see like this marker is where that overhang is. So I'm going to press G and X, but I'm going to press X again. So I'm on the local axes, the local X axis of that object. So G, X, X. And now I'm looking to find that intersecting with that marker, which is there. And now I've got that second part of my building overhanging. And then finally, for now, I'm just going to add in another cube. So back in object mode, I'm going to bring in a cube to be my blue thing. I'm going to go and bring that up on the Z axis, so it's kind of sat on the floor. I've aligned it with these marks here. It's starting to look a little bit chaotic, so I'm going to come up here and use my X-ray mode so I can actually see through my geometry to see my markers. So with this, I'm going to rotate it. So similar sort of thing that I did with the window. So I'm going to rotate it to align with those markers and just thinking it through. Are these markers super accurate? Because this blue thing is actually kind of in the reality aligned with this building here. So maybe my blue markers aren't super accurate in terms of their orientation. So I could either go in and redo those markers, or just think logically through and saying sometimes these markers, particularly the short life markers, these zero weight markers in awkward places, aren't going to be super reliable. I can just kind of trust that, or do a little bit of interpretation with this of saying, okay, if we imagine that this marker is good, we're roughly, so yes, that was supposed to be in that corner, but I know that this aligned with my building. So I think that's kind of looking good. Let's just guide that up. I didn't have a marker for the height of this. So here we might want to just look through our camera here and get a rough idea of where that is. Ooh, it's not looking great. So something is off there in terms of its position and its perspective. I'm not happy with those markers, so I think I will potentially go and redo them, but just for the sake of the video, I'm not going to do that now. But if I were to redo them, I'd just get back into motion tracking. I could delete those markers, I could place new ones down, track them again, then if I do the solve camera motion, that will then update and they will appear in my view, and I can carry on working from there. But for now, I'm not going to perfect that. I'm just going to leave that as it is. Okay, so then my track and solve of my scene is pretty much done and ready to go. So the next thing in terms of my reconstruction process of my environment is to think about my lighting. So finally, let's talk about lighting. I have a light inside of my scene, which I don't actually need. So I'm going to delete that light. And actually what I want instead is to use a HDRI. Now, so on location, I've shot lots of 360 images at multiple exposures. I can then compile and compress them together inside of a program like Photoshop to make them all into one single image. There are separate video guides out there on that process. That is a process that I have already done, although I've just realized I haven't downloaded the file, so maybe I will do it quickly. So I'm going to open up Photoshop. I'm going to go to Automate, Merge to HDR Pro, choose my files, which are on my desktop inside of my folder here. So these are all of my multiple exposures. I'm going to open those up. I'm not going to attempt to automatically align. I'm going to click OK. I'm then going to allow and wait for Photoshop to do the batch process. This takes a little while to get it thinking. But essentially what it's doing here is compiling all of those images together into one single document. It will then come up with another splash screen interface window where we can just check it's working and check that everything is okay. So this has taken all those images, compiled them together. I'm doing this quickly, so I'm just going to ensure that remove ghosts isn't checked, and I want to switch to 32-bit. I'm going to turn off complete toning in camera raw. I'm going to move my slider up the end here so I can actually see a good preview. I'm going to click OK. Then that's going to create the HDRI for me inside of Photoshop and open it up. And here all I'm going to do is do a little bit of clone stamping to tidy up the remove this tripod. So with my clone stamp, I'm going to paint that out. So we've now got a clean HDRI, and then I'm going to save that. So file, save as. Let's pop it into my folder, and the format I'm going to use as a radiance file. So, and I'm going to call this HDRI. Bosh, done. So to bring that into Blender, I'm going to come to my world properties over the side here, and on my color, I'm going to add an environment texture node, and I'm going to load in that HDRI. There we go. And so that is now inside of my scene. I'm going to bring up my shader editor and switch to my world properties. And now I can see that element inside of here. Now I know that this is going to be too strong in strength. It's a super powerful image with really high exposure. Note that we can't see anything yet though. The reason for that is that we're just looking in solid view. If I switch to material preview, I'm getting a better feel for what's going on. And if I switch to render view, everything goes mad. So this is what we're actually seeing inside of our shot. We've got our HDRI image. If I scroll around in 3D space, we can see our HDRI is in the shot and it's lighting our scene, but it's pretty intense. So I'm going to bring my strength down quite significantly to 0.05, and now that's looking a little bit nicer for us. Although the HDRI is not aligned correctly with our camera, so I'm going to add some additional nodes in here. I need a mapping node, and there's a quick keyboard shortcut to turn that on, but only providing that in our preferences we have a node wrangler add-on turned on. So if I search for node wrangler, tick that box, all is good. So now if I have this texture or environment texture node selected and press Control T, I then get some mapping nodes up. I'm going to switch that mapping node from point to texture, because we're working with a textured image here, and I'm going to rotate it by 90 degrees on the Z-axis, which will then orientate it down my road. I can also kind of tweak and adjust its location on the X and the Y axes to try and align that a little bit better with my view, but it's never going to be perfect because the cameras were just different in terms of their makeup and their lenses. So maybe something like this might be good for me. Roughly, like that. But now I can see my HDRI, I can't see my video. So we need to do one more thing over in our, well, a few more things, sorry, in our render properties. I'm going to switch my render engine from Eevee to Cycles. Cycles will now respect and understand what we want to be doing with these elements, which is that these are going to be shadow catchers. I'm also going to switch to be using my graphics card on my machine. I'm also going to reduce the max samples to 64 and turn denoise on inside of the viewport. And in terms of the film option here, I'm going to click transparent. And that means that I can now see, instead of my HDR, I can see my footage through my camera. So we need transparent on to see our footage. But using that, I can switch between my two views, so my HDRI and my footage, and I can see how that alignment is happening. And it's, like I say, it's not going to be perfect, but it's not far off. So this will do us for now. I'm going to turn transparent off so I can look at my HDRI, because I also think I could do with a bit more saturation in my shot, so bringing a little bit more color into my HDRI. So I'm going to add, so I'm going to come to my add menu, Shift A, and I'm going to bring up my hue saturation node, drop that in between here, between my environment texture and my background, and just increase my saturation to 1.5 just to get a little bit more color back in. But speaking of color, the color balance, color matching is quite off with these two shots here. So I'm going to do a little bit of color matching to just get those to be accurate. To do that, I'm going to come back to my camera and turn it back to 4K. So I'm getting the full res of my shot here. And I'm going to do a little bit of math. So for that, I'm going to use a color mix node. So I'm going to get that out. I'm not going to plug it in just yet, but I'm going to use this as a means to capture some information from my shot. So I'm going to go to my B value here. I'm going to switch to RGB. I'm going to use my eyedropper to click and drag to sample some colors of a particular area of my video footage. And this is quite a good area on this shot, is this little panel of glass here on the wall. So using my eyedropper, clicking and dragging, and now I'm sampling and I'm getting RGB values for that particular area. I'm then going to make a note of those. So if I get my notepad out and let's copy those values over. So 0.329. This is the fun bit, 0.5358. 0.334. So these are my red, green, and blue values. Zoom in so you can see that a little bit clearer. So these are my red, green, and blue for my video. So the video file, video layer. Then I'm going to do that same workflow process for my HDRI. So I'm going to turn the transparency off. I'm going to now find that same panel in my HDRI. And now I'm going to capture and sample these tonal values by clicking and dragging there. So 3 new sets of RGB values. So 0.375 for red. For green, it's 0.462. And for blue, it is 0.579. And then the maths is, I'm going to, so I want to, ultimately what I'm doing is I'm trying to find the difference between these values. So if I divide the first value by the second value for each of these, so let's also get a calculator out. So 0.329 divided by 0.375 equals, so there's my value. I'm going to take the same kind of 3 decimal places there. Clear that, do another one. So 0.358 divided by 0.462 is this. So 3 decimal places, but I'm going to round up as well. So let's make that into a 5. And then finally 0.334 divided by 0.579 equals, again, I'm gonna round that up. Okay, so there's my maths done. And so these values here is the difference between our 2 shots. So I'm then going to take these values and copy them into my node here. So there's the red, there's the green, and there is the blue. And just double checking, this is giving me a result which I was hoping for and kind of expecting. That this is, I know that my video footage is slightly warmer, slightly orangey and yellow. I know that my HDRI is more blue. So the result here is accurate. This is going into the warmer areas away from the cooler areas. So what can I do with this now? Well, this is a mix color node, but I can change it instead of being mix to be multiply. Let's untick the clamp result and clamp factor, but increase the factor to 1 to make it pure maths of it's going to multiply this color by this color and give us a result. So for the B value, that's the one that we've just created, but the A value can be the HDRI, can come into the A, and the result can come out into the background. So we're plugging that into our system here, and see what happens there is that we've color corrected our HDRI, so ensure that we're looking at the HDRI with that transparency turned off. Also, with Node Wrangler on, we can select that multiply node and press M to mute it. So this was the before, this is the after. So before, quite blue and cool. After is a lot warmer. And then with that now on and switching between our footage and our HDRI, those color values and color tones are much better matched. So we're now going to get accurate color light reflections inside of our scene. So one final thing is now that I've made my shadow catchers, I need to tell Blender that these are shadow catchers, so these parts of our building. So my floor already is my ground plane. So if I come over to my object data properties over here, and in visibility, we can see that it has been classed as a shadow catcher. Just need to do the same for my buildings here. So tell that to be a shadow catcher and this to be a shadow catcher. I'm regretting not having that blue thing in there, but life is life. So these are now shadow catchers, so they disappear from my scene. And in render view, what we should be seeing, so let me get that to render view as well. What we should be seeing is nothing. We just got our video file. Our world is being lit by our HDRI, but we can't actually see any of the effects that's going on there. Oh, my camera's stalling because I'm trying to push it too much. So let me join those together and hope that this works out a little bit nicer. Oh, it's because also we're still looking at the 4K footage. So let me, so my computer's only struggling because I'm doing the recording as well. So maybe that's a little bit better. Okay, so we can't actually see anything going on. So let me make something. So a UV sphere. Let's guide that up inside of my world. And so now I've got a big ball in my scene, and it can sit on the floor and cast a shadow. So see we've got a shadow from the shadow catcher there. So it's doing its job. If with this ball I assign a material to it and make it full bore metallic and slightly off, slightly rough, I'm just going to turn my camera off. You don't need to see my face anymore. It's just my computer struggling to play everything back with the recording. So we've got a shiny ball inside of our scene, and we can see that it's got some shadows being cast on the floor because the shadow catcher is there, but also the shadow catcher is being seen in the reflections. But in the reflections inside that ball is the rest of my world. Here's my HDRI is being reflected. So we can see our HDRI and we can see our shadow catchers inside shiny objects. They are working inside of our scene. So we also need to do one more thing, which is to apply a material to our shadow catcher. So we're getting accurate bounce light and accurate reflections of these objects. And we can do that quite quickly by coming to our material setup here. I'm going to switch to material preview again, so hopefully my computer can chill out a little bit. I'm going to add a new material, and I'm going to call this projection. And for this, I'm going to switch it to be a diffuse BSDF. So just remove some of the options, and I'm going to make it all the way rough. Similar sort of thing to the environment texture. I'm going to add a texture node, but I'm going to use an image texture. In my shader editor, I can switch to object so I can see my node here. So what texture am I adding? So I can, this is just a duplicate of what we've got going on over here. So I'm going to add a texture to this. What texture? Well, I'm going to use my video file. But I'm not going to use my full bore video file. I'm going to use my proxy, and I'm going to use my undistorted proxy. So I'm going to select the first frame for that and open it up. So you can see a slight change there, but the mapping isn't quite right for this just yet. So I'm going to do Control T again to get my mapping node up. And here I'm actually going to use the texture coordinate. So rather than just using the UV to place that image onto the object, I'm going to switch to window. And then we should see now that this, so I'm in material preview mode, I can see now on my floor is my video file. Also, when I move around in 3D space, this is what the window process is doing, is that it's where it's projecting that image based on where I'm looking from. So this looks mad when I'm working here, but through my camera, it's all lining up and is accurate. However, in its default settings, this is just the first frame of that shot. If I come to my image texture node here, I can tell it, rather than being single image, to be an image sequence. Tell it how many frames to play, so how many are in the sequence, so it's 150 frames. And I also wanted it to auto refresh, so every frame it's going to reload in what the next frame is. So now, if I make this back into a timeline, as I play through, this is the material on the, see it here, this is the material that's on my floor, on my shadow catcher, is the video. So it's going to cycle in sync with everything else. So let me then apply that same material to my other parts of my shadow catcher. And then if I come back and look at my rendered view, what I should now see inside of my ball is the reflections of my buildings and my road, because it's showing the video from the shadow catcher, but it's also now showing accurate kind of bounce light and reflections coming from all of these areas as well. So that, folks, is the process of getting everything together and in place for set extension. So we've done our motion tracking, our solve, our environment reconstruction in terms of geometry and also lighting and materials. So now we can add any object into our scene, and there is accurate lighting and accurate geometry for these to catch shadows but also intersect with. So see, we're getting the shadows and it's being occluded by our geometry that we've created there. And most importantly, the tracking is working as well, so that as we play through, our 3D world is also moving in sync with our footage. So thank you very much for listening. That was, as I predicted, quite a long video. Let me just chill Blender out. So hopefully I'm back in full frames per second now. But hopefully that has been useful. These are just workflows that, yes, work for this project, but this could work for any project that is doing this similar sort of motion tracking, environment reconstruction, and set extension. So hopefully that has been helpful and useful. Good luck with it, and I will see you all soon. Thank you.